Welcome everyone to today's webinar. My name is Martha Rands. I'm the programs with the Pacific Legal Education and Outreach Society. And this is the first of our national network of legal clinics for the arts, Art Law Talks, where we try to broaden our impact across the country and invite artists to participate from coast to coast to coast. I'd first like to just acknowledge that I and our administrator are on the unceded ancestral traditional lands of the Coast Salish peoples, the Tsleil-Waututh, the Squamish, and the Musqueam, and we thank them for their forbearance of our existence on the land. This is going to be a very informal conversation with Esther Rauschenberg and Nadia Gohar. And Nadia and I have both been having some Wi-Fi issues, so if we freeze, we will come back, just saying. And I'm going to ask all of you to put your questions. There's a Q&A button down at the bottom there. I will be monitoring those and moderating specific questions. And our administrator will be on the chat function. By all means, contact her if you're having any kind of technical issues. So I'm going to sort of just launch right in by inviting Esther to introduce herself and tell us about what we are. I'm getting a bit of feedback, but about what are the main issues that sort of came to your attention as a result of.
Hi, Martha. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me here on this panel. I too acknowledge that I'm on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territories. Well, we're in unprecedented times, as we all are aware of, hence the Zooming of this topic. So far, we have experienced a couple of situations here in Vancouver that I'm aware of. I do anticipate more as we move forward with this pandemic. One situation that I have been involved with is the eviction of 50 artists from one studio space. It appears that the leaseholders were unable to fulfill their commitment to pay the rent to the landlords. So we're in the middle of this particular situation. I am anticipating actually, probably for the first time ever, a positive outcome in respect to this potential displacement, and we are hoping for good news. At the moment, we're currently in limbo. The artists are able to remain in their studio spaces. We have through, and I'm sorry I have to throw this out at you, Martha, but we did seek some assistance for legal assistance, and we did receive some through Martha, and that has been extremely beneficial for all of us. And it's really helped us look at the situation differently and deal with it differently had we not had the legal assistance.
Yeah. Thanks, Esther. That's good to know that there might be a positive outcome. I think, you know, when I looked at a lot of the tenancy issues that were arising with COVID, was that the reason that people need legal advice or legal support is so they can negotiate, because you're in such an unequal bargaining position. And often, you know, you've maybe signed an agreement that the terms in it you didn't fully understand to begin with. So I'm really glad to hear that our assistance made a difference.
Truly
And
have.
Nadia, what have been, can you introduce yourself and also let us know what your experiences have been?
Sure, yeah. Thanks so much for having me. And so I'm based in Toronto. I'm from Egypt originally, but I've been living here for maybe the last six or 7 years. And obviously I've been also impacted by COVID-19, maybe not as extreme as being evicted from my studio, but I've had show cancellations and little to no information on, you know, how to access legal help or how to kind of go from here. Even in terms of studio rent, like, is everyone still obliged to pay this rent, or does the government help in some way? It's just like a bit of a confusing time.
Yeah, it's, you know, I'm when you're talking, I'm reminded of how isolating it is to work for many artists, visual artists, is that you're often working alone, and so finding the information that you need when you need it can be a real struggle. And you know, you're not alone in that. Fortunately for you, there's also access to the Artist Legal Advice Service that exists in Toronto. That I know they've just started in the last few weeks meeting with clients over the phone, so that there's legal advice available.
Great.
Yeah, very important, particularly given some of the delays for some of the other services.
Yeah.
So one of the issues that we've been dealing with is artists who've had work consigned at galleries or stores that are selling their work, and the stores are closed and in fact are not planning to reopen. And has that been your experience at all in Toronto? Do you know of any cases like that?
Well, I've sort of heard of, like, I have a few friends and fellow artists who have been, not necessarily the gallery closing because things still do operate online, but maybe kicked off the roster, you know, in like in certain difficult times, the gallerist has decided to reevaluate their roster, and so they've sent out emails, you know, claiming that this artist is taken off the roster and is instead now a collaborator. And then it's like, where do we go from here? What about all the work that's being stored in this space? Like, what? And also,
oh wow,
it's just, yeah, just difficult to kind of navigate. How to, like, obviously there are legal agreements between artists and gallerists, but it just sort of seems like an unprecedented time where they shouldn't be allowed to make those decisions in the middle of this pandemic.
So they're unilaterally changing the conditions. Wow. Anything like that on your end, Esther?
Yeah, I think that it's a little early. We are sort of in a bit of a holding pattern here where I don't think many artists really know what's going on with their work. I have heard of a situation where artists are not having their work returned and are not being compensated. So there definitely is that concern. And I think that one of the biggest problems is that a lot of artists and gallerists or exhibit space kind of owners rarely keep up the inventory. So what we see is artists starting off with a very good relationship with whoever it is that they're going to be exhibiting with, whether it's a restaurant or a not-for-profit art center or a gallery. And they start off with the inventory, and as that changes over time, the inventory isn't kept up to date, either by the artist or the person who's presenting and exhibiting that work. And so often what I have found is that a lot of problems occur further down the road, because initially the relationship is one of, hey, I love your art, and hey, I like, you know, the way that you present my art, and it's always off to a good start, obviously. And as we go further down that road, the artwork that has been sold hasn't necessarily been updated. So that's really where I see the problems arising. Sometimes the inventory is captured at the beginning, but it's not captured midway, and it gets extremely confusing. I know of another situation in another province here, where the gallerist has, and it's not because they're trying to not, you know, pay the artist. It's just that they're disorganized and they haven't kept up the inventory, but also the artist hasn't kept up the inventory on their end. So I think it's, you know, both parties need to be held to account in that respect. So not sure.
How would you, is there something we could do that would help that situation?
Yeah, I think for artists to really understand their contractual obligations, providing assistance in terms of the contract that they are signing, understanding that they really need to get in touch with whoever it is that they have that contractual agreement with on an ongoing basis. And then also really, you know, abiding by that contractual agreement. So when the gallerist or whoever says, we will pay you within 30 days of the sale of that, you as the artist get your money within 30 days and ask for it. And don't dismiss the fact that, oh, well, they'll pay me when they can. You ask for the funds that you are entitled to because they sold your work.
Mm-hmm. I guess you just kind of fall into this constantly having to fight for that. That gets a bit tiring, you know, following up, sending the emails, and then a few slip away somehow. But I think it would be extremely helpful if there was someone to, like, any kind of contractual agreement between an artist and a gallery. If there was, I mean, I'm sure places like this exist as well, as, you know, to break down the contract and to really explain what people are signing off on.
Yeah. Well, one thing that comes to my mind is actually if we had the ability to have sort of a virtual assistant that would, so instead of you, you know, you look at the contract, but then there's maybe a virtual assistant who explains, like if you click on something and then you get an explanation of the various terms. And one thing that occurs to me is that I don't know that there are very many contracts. I mean, first there's an issue of not having contracts at all, right? But then there's the contracts that they don't actually imagine an obligation to update the inventory whenever an artwork is sold. So that may be something to incorporate into like a simple contract, is that when, not only when you are an artwork is sold are you entitled to payment, but you are also, it is the gallery that then has to make the change to the inventory. And maybe it's an inventory that's in some form of a shared form document, you know, right, so that either party can look at it. You know?
Martha, I know of one situation where an artist sold 4 pieces for the equivalent of, let's say it was about $10,000, and they were paid $4,000. It was a brokerage firm that bought this art. They went under, they folded, and when the artist went to get the work back, they were told, well, we don't know which work they paid you for. So let's say each work was then worth $2,500. The artist was paid for, or $2,000. The artist was paid for 2 pieces, but which 2 pieces? So the artist couldn't prove that those other pieces that they would not return back were not the ones that they had paid for.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So you have to be like pretty explicit. You have to be detailed. And I know as artists, we don't like doing this stuff. There's no question about it. It is tedious. It's like, who wants to keep on top of it? We just want to do our work. And unfortunately, we are individual business owners of our own artwork, and we're the ones who have to look after that particular aspect of it because nobody else will. But we do need assistance.
Yeah. Yeah, it would be good if it, you know, it'd be a good project for like every art institution, like wherever people go to art school, is that you get a little workbook that has little cheat sheets and, you know, explains some of this stuff. Maybe even a tool that you get given to when you first start out, so that there's some consistency, and actually there must be easier ways to do this. I mean, you know, I'm back from the olden days of paper. Like a lot of this we could be doing, you know, using various software, I would imagine. So, you know, I think there's a question about, you know, whether or not it's something like, I mean, it could even be a service, you know, that like the East Side Culture Crawl provides to members, you know?
Yeah.
Just a sort of handbook, guidebook, something simple. I remember when I was in art school, we didn't start to even talk about that sort of stuff until maybe a few weeks before graduation. They said, oh, and by the way,
yeah,
you should do these things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do those talks. And
emerging artists are, of course, the most vulnerable. And they're looking for different opportunities to showcase their work. So a lot of them, and it's not just emerging, and mid-career artists as well, are showing in what I would call unconventional spaces. You know, theater lobbies and restaurants, those kind of places, because you do want to put your work out there to the public, and that's really how you start to build, you know, audience for your work and how you try to survive. I do know of situations where restaurants have actually closed down, sold the contents of the restaurant to somebody else, including the artwork.
yeah. Yeah, and you know, I think that one of the struggles is that I can't remember if you said it or not, Esther, but you know, like they're often as disorganized as any artist might be. You know, there are, in fact, you know, there's actually a whole series of guides that were created by CARFAC Ontario, including sample contracts. The issue that those present is that for a long time they were only available behind a paywall, or you had to be a member in order to access them, which made it very difficult for people to just find them as they're browsing. And, you know, I ran into an artist yesterday in the lineup for the swimming pool, and, you know, even a small outlay of $25 right now seems like it's too much. So from my vantage point, I think as much as I appreciate all of the work that CARFAC and others have done to put some material out there, I think now is the time to be making it freely available. And in an ideal world, really available to, and to those of us who could actually perhaps make them into something else without it being onerous. You know, one of the arguments that we're making to the Canada Council and to Canadian Heritage is to automate, for us to be able to get some funding to enhance the digital platform that we're in the process of creating that would allow us to create some kind of explanation guide for basic contracts, so that at least people had a baseline, but ideally they would then have a place that they could go to get those questions answered. Because often you're presented with a contract with not a lot of time to review it. So even if, and maybe you do know that there's a clinic in Toronto, you then have to get an appointment to see somebody, and you may not have 3 weeks to wait. You may need to see that, you know, and that's another issue. And some of this stuff we could even be having law students do, actually provide legal information to individuals, but we need a system that's set up to do that. And none of the clinics have operating funding from any of the arts councils. So it makes it very, very difficult for a lot of different reasons to do that. But definitely, you know, Nadia, you should check out the CARFAC materials, because they're at least a starting place. And, you know, we're hoping also any of you out there, you know, that have other ideas of things that would be very useful. I know like the contract provision around updating the inventory could be very useful. And, you know, being in regular contact, having somebody you can regularly be in contact with can make a difference. Unfortunately, the issue when somebody goes bust, it hasn't changed much since Carmen Lamanna went bust and left a whole bunch of artists high and dry. It can be very difficult to get your work out of where a trustee in bankruptcy is involved.
I think that's the concern at this particular time. And I'm sure that's the concern back east, Nadia, as well, is that we don't know which businesses are going to stay open or not, and what is going to happen with the artwork. And I have to say, overall, you know, gallerists are just like, you know, any other business. The majority of them are, you know, ethical and upfront and really good to work with. So, but, you know, when push comes to shove and people are in, you know, a critical financial situation, sometimes we don't know what it is that they're going to do. I think it's incumbent on artists to be contacting wherever their art is currently being located and try to find out what the long-term plan is for that particular business or that not-for-profit. They need to know where their artwork is and where it's going to go or what's going to happen with it.
That would be something that you know, one of the student volunteers or student jobs. I don't know if who's got the student jobs. We got a student who's working on creating materials, but it would be a great thing for one of the, you know, the artists run centers or CARFAC or Professional Artists Association or any collective of artists to start you know, being able to help, like have students be making these calls and finding out who's open, who's not open. I wonder, is there an inventory of all the galleries?
I want to also kind of mention that maybe it's not just galleries and spaces that show the work, but also when it comes to studio spaces themselves, if you're unable to pay the rent or if you're somehow holding off on your rent, you know, the landlord is in charge of that space and you're not exactly sure what they might lock you out at some point, or, you know, you don't know whether to kind of stand your ground and leave your stuff there, continue to work, try to continue to go there and work, or yeah, just a bit of a standstill when it comes to not just showing your work, but making your work in a space that you're renting.
Well, I think the issue with studios is multifaceted, as many of these things are. And one of the issues is that there's if you have a direct relationship with the landlord, then the landlord can apply for the CERCA money. But in order to do that, you need a rent deferral agreement. Many people don't even know where to start to find that. So we have one on our website, which anybody can download. It's a very simple agreement. It's a starting place. You give it to your landlord, and it's an agreement for a rent deferral. And then they can apply for that 75% subsidy from the government. The problem is that landlords are not all making these applications.
Yeah.
And that is an issue that's still unaddressed as far as I know. But there has been a lot of advocacy because small businesses, restaurants and such, are also dealing with landlords that are not willing to make an application for the CERCA. So when they eventually have to pay their rent, they're going to go bust because they owe so much money they won't be able to, and they're only functioning at 50%. So it's a real problem. For those people, like many artists and studios, where you're subtenants, then you're really vulnerable because you're one step away from the owner, the landlord. The only good thing about the situation is that the courts were closed for all but urgent matters for 3 months. And seeking writs of possession, which is what they would have to do in BC, in order to evict you, were not matters that were allowed to be heard by the court. I think in Ontario also, they put a moratorium actually on any evictions of commercial tenants. So if that makes you feel any better.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I know of very few, in fact, I know of no situations where the artist or the landlord has sought the rent relief that's being provided. Apparently, it's just too complex. People have looked at it and just said, I can't go there. It's just too much work to figure out how it can and cannot work. It's not been in my experience, having talked to a few both artists and landlords, and something that they've continued to pursue. So I don't know of anybody who's done that.
Yeah, I think it's a real problem with the way it's rolled out, and there's no question that when we get through this phase, there's going to be a lot of people holding on to basically having to repay money they don't have. And so I think we're going to see a real problem at that point. I mean, there's a few stores and galleries that we know of have closed, but there's lots of places that you wouldn't know we have no idea what they're doing. And that's why, if I said this to various people 3 months ago, we had all unemployed law students, I would have had them out doing a lot of things, like actively pursuing and trying to help people with negotiations, with You know, how do I find out who my landlord is? How do I write a letter to my landlord? All that kind of stuff. It's a big area, and one that, because we don't have much in the way of infrastructure to deliver a program like that, it's very difficult to make it happen. So, you know, anybody want to ask any questions? I have seen ones in the Q&A, and thank you for the comments about the contracts, April. And we'll definitely make sure that people are aware of how to get them. And I'm sorry about the feedback. I do not have a set of headphones, and this is the first time we've ever gotten feedback after 12 other webinars. So if anybody wants to put a question to either Nadia or Esther, now would be a good time to do that. Going once.
I do want to say, if there's no questions, that there are other issues that we should be, you know, looking at. And you know, specifically, I'm thinking about copyright. I do know of several situations where artists have had reproductions of their work copied in, you know, internationally, and they don't know what to do about that, or where to go, or what recourse they can seek. So that's definitely, you know, one area that needs to be considered.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, certainly we deal, almost all of the disputes we deal with are related to copyright, and often have to do with misuse of other people's work. And you know, what the issue there is, as everybody knows, is it's one thing to get something taken down, it's another thing to get recourse. In other words, to get that license fee paid, to perhaps pursue the individual. Litigation in this space is very expensive. We've had a number of, I've made a number of calls over the years trying to get lawyers to take on pro bono copyright enforcement without much success. We are one of the jurisdictions where you can take a matter like that small claim. But not every small claims court in the country will hear it. And now that our small claims matters here in BC are going to the Civil Resolution Tribunal, it's not clear to me whether or not they'd even entertain a minor infringement or a minor infringement. But you know, it's a big issue. It continues to be a major concern. And it's why we need, you know, a network of legal clinics that can actually provide representation, not just summary legal advice, because we're very limited in what we can do in every province by the insurer and by simply being all volunteers. So, you know, it's a big problem. So Joel says he now has a service called Pixie that finds all the thefts of my work on the internet.
Wow.
They litigate for you and they take half. I haven't tried the litigation option yet, but would be curious if others have. Is this service in the United States? Joel, can you? That would be also a really interesting resource, because they're not the only one. Copyright enforcement folks tend to proliferate in the United States, where they actually have an opportunity to make real money. it would be interesting to know, maybe to put together a list of all the known ones that can do it. Often it's not cost effective, particularly if they're taking half and the value is relatively small. I don't know, Joel, if you want to become unmuted and maybe speak to this. If you're there. Here you go. You just need to unmute yourself, Joel.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you. Sorry.
Yes, I've tried Pixie, and it's astounding the number of times my work has been stolen.
Oh.
Quite often, though, it's Pinterest or something like that you might just send them a takedown notice. And a colleague of mine, a fellow artist, I guess, has used their litigation option, and they'll only do it if it's worth it, so to speak. So if it's, a big publication or website or big company or something that is, taking your work, I guess they'll go after it. I don't know how small of a claim they will go after, but they'll send cease and desist notices and things like that also.
And is this in the United States or in Canada?
I honestly don't know where they're based. Right now I'm in the US, so but I found them on the internet. I'm really not sure where they're based. I could check and see. Yeah,
there's a number, I know there's a number of US based enforcement people. I get asked all the time. I think there would be a real benefit to having people, a Canadian-based service.
Yeah, I don't know. I know there's more than just Pixie. There are several services out there. At the time I was researching it, but I don't recall the names of the others right now.
Right.
And does this service do a visual search, or are we talking more like copyright infringement for writing, or is it just seeking, are you a visual artist? Is it finding replicas of things you've made based on images?
Yes, excellent question. I don't know if they also do writing. I am a visual artist, and they use artificial intelligence recognition algorithms, and it's pretty good at finding matches, and I would never find them on my own. So it works really well in terms of finding matches. You can go in and filter it out. If it's something that's similar to yours, but it isn't actually your artwork, you can just remove it from the list. But they send you like a monthly assessment of what they found.
And what is the URL? Can you say?
I believe it's just pixie.com, pixy.com. And I was just going to look it up and see if I could find out where they are based.
Oh, PIXSY.
Oh, maybe it's PIXSY. Yeah, that could be it. Sorry.
Find and fight image theft. Well, there would be a good, another good opportunity for us to send a student. I know we have a student listening. It'd be very interesting to see where else, what other options there might be. That's great, because if I can ask Joel, how much do you sell the work for? Give us a ballpark. I don't want you to tell tales out of school, but are you an artist selling in the range of 1,000 or 5,000? I mean,
it's all over the board, from maybe $800 to $15,000. That's US.
Right. Okay. So it's worth it to you, whether it's $800 or $15. It's sort of obvious, but
Well,
It's worth
but
it to
that's,
you no matter what.
you're asking the price of the work that I'm selling, or you're asking what
No,
they
like,
do?
it's worth it to you to have to lose 50% of the value of the artwork?
Well, it is if somebody has, I mean, this isn't physically stolen artwork. This is
Right, this is licensed, so it's a license
right.
fee.
So it's
So they get half the license fee. Is there a minimum license fee?
you know, it's totally situational what they can recover.
Right.
It's based on the use and also whether or not you have registered your copyright. So at least in the U.S., on the U.S. side, and I'd love to know how it works in Canada. Just so everybody knows, I'm trying to get to Canada. So I'm stuck in the U.S. at the moment, but maybe when all this COVID thing is over and we can actually get there, we will eventually become Canadian residents. But in the meantime, I'm here. So back to the copyright thing, if it's registered, they can get punitive damages.
Right.
Otherwise, it's actual damages, the way I understand it. So if the way they're using it is, I don't know, and then there's just, I'm sure you know this better than me, there's just certain, the fact that somebody uses it without permission has some penalty attached to it or some minimum use fee. And I don't remember exactly what that is, just because I haven't tried the reason I went with this is because in the past I've had to go through litigation. And so first of all, you have to know that the person did it. And I've only found that out by accident in the past. And then it's costly to, you have to go to court or you have to hire a lawyer. Right. And the way I've handled it in the past is to do contracts whenever possible so that it doesn't go through copyright and a federal court, which is a lot more expensive. It can just be a contract violation. Right,
which is why you can pursue some of these matters in certain small claims courts in Canada, which are provincial. But the important thing that has come up in the question and answer, and I'll answer it, is, do you have to register your copyright in Canada? And the answer is no. So most artists don't register their copyright.
Is there a difference in damages?
Yes. Under the Copyright Act, you're limited to statutory damages. So that's the disincentive for litigation.
Our feedback is pretty bad.
How do I turn off my microphone?
Yeah, sorry about the feedback. I don't know why, but so the answer was that you don't have to register your artwork in Canada. Could everybody hear that?
Yeah, I think we're getting lots of feedback.
Right. Okay. Well, I'll answer. Maybe I'll unmute. Yeah, some well, yeah, sorry about the feedback. I don't know how to fix it. Esther and Nadia, do you have any closing?
I just want to, I think if we're getting feedback, then this might be difficult to tackle this topic, but I am, and I think many artists independent artists have applied for CERB, And I do know that there's a lot of questions surrounding that and whether artists are eligible or not. I know that many artists are technically working at their work, but they're not necessarily being able to do anything with that work in terms of selling it or exhibiting it. So it's a bit of a gray area in terms of eligibility. I know that April from Carfax has some information in respect to that. And I think she mentioned something about royalties are not considered income. You are allowed to make up to $1,000 in income from your work, but there's still a lot of questions about whether artists are entitled to the CERB benefit or not. And there is a concern, I think, that at the end of the year, that some of those artists are going to have to potentially return those funds.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is where, again, we need advocacy, because this is the role of the national art service organizations to be raising this directly with government. You know, the government did say apply and don't worry, and then it came out with all these penalties just recently, which haven't passed through the legislature yet, so they're stalled. But there's no question that there could be penalties at the end of the day, and nobody wants that laid upon them. And, you know, I think that this is one area where, as I said, I think there needs to be some further advocacy around how limited the benefits that have been made available are to individual artists. And when your income is already really precarious, you don't want to take further risks by thinking you might have to deal with the CRA next year. I think the risk, based on their initial comment, is probably relatively low. I think the CRA is going to take a long time to get back up and running in its regular programs. It had to shut down the charities directorate in order to have enough people to manage the CERB. So, you know,
I tend to agree with you on that, Martha. My concern has to do also with the artists who are really in need and haven't applied for it because they're concerned that they might not that they might not be eligible. And so they're struggling with that question in respect to whether they should or shouldn't apply for that. And I know that was going on a couple of months ago. That situation might have changed, but there's no reason for artists to be, you know, up against the wall when there is the possibility for them to be receiving these funds.
Yeah, well, this is the question to put to Canadian Heritage Minister Stephen Guilbeault, and his staff next week are doing a webinar, and that question should be put directly to her. On they should be coming out with information to support the sector. But again, you know, I think that this is an advocacy issue, and that's really all I'm going to say on the topic. We will follow up with some links for everyone to what we've spoken about. And I will look to see if there's any Canadian versions of Pixie. I think there's a lot of reasons why there aren't in Canada, mainly having to do with the statutory damage limits under the Copyright Act. You just don't see the big awards that you do in the United States, and nor do you see the potential upside of a punitive award, which, I mean, Danielle Morel won about $1 million based on punitive damages against Getty and Agence France Presse. So Nadia, do you have any last words before we say goodbye? And
I think I'm okay. That was very insightful. Thank you.
great. Well, thanks Esther and Nadia for participating, and April for your comments in the Q&A. And we will have something in the next week or so that we'll send to all the participants. And I encourage you to keep participating in whatever events we're doing. We're trying to use these webinars and all the opportunities for reaching out to people to also show the government that there is a real need for legal information, education, and advice in this space. So thanks, everybody. Sorry about the feedback. I'm going to minimize it now by just saying goodbye.